Great companies aren't built on average talent. In private equity backed, high growth businesses, the right operator changes everything. Onward Headhunting partners with founders, operators, and investors to build elite finance, strategy, and operations teams. From early hires to exit ready leadership, we deliver the talent that drives outcomes. If you are scaling or transacting, go onward. Visit onwardheadhunting.com or find us on LinkedIn to learn more.
This is Scott Becker with the Becker Business and the Becker Private Equity Podcast. We're thrilled today to be joined by a brilliant leader, scientist, entrepreneur. We're joined today by Mirianas Chachisvilis. And Mirianas is a fascinating background. He grew up in Lithuania, spent some time in Sweden, and then came to the United States and went to one of the most esteemed educational institutions in the country, Caltech. He's been a scientist in biotech for many years, and then not that long ago, founded his own company. He's been involved in some other entrepreneurial efforts called Veriskin. And Mirianas is going to tell us today about Veriskin, about what he's doing, trends he's watching, what he's most excited about, and hopefully a lot more. Mirianas, can you take a second and introduce yourself and tell us about Veriskin and about your background?
Hello, Scott. Yes. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so my background, as you mentioned, I'm coming from Lithuania. After receiving a degree in physics over there, I went to do my Ph.D. in Sweden, Lund University, which I completed, and then went for additional training, postdoctoral training at Caltech in Pasadena, where I worked with a Nobel laureate, Ahmed Zewail, until around 2000. After which, actually, I went back to Europe, to Sweden, to become a faculty assistant professor. Worked there for a few years, and then I came back to US because essentially I liked California, I like this country. So I came to San Diego, joined a company called Diagnostics, where I worked for a few years until it was acquired by Novartis. After that, I went back to academia. Doing research at La Jolla Bioengineering Institute. Mostly it was NIH funded, a lot of NIH funded projects over there in the healthcare area. And after a few years over there, I decided I'd like to try on my own. So I founded Veriskin. And Veriskin is a medical device company dedicated to facilitating and improving accuracy of skin cancer diagnostics.
So tell us, how long ago did you start Veriskin? How long ago was that founded?
So it was the idea itself originated around 2013. It wasn't a company, more like a partnership with a few of my colleagues from Diagnostics. And then it evolved. So eventually the company itself was founded in 2016, basically right after we obtained our first NIH award to develop it.
Phenomenal. And talk a little bit about the skin cancer world. Is obviously, skin cancer itself is exploding. Talk a little bit about what Veriskin does and why it's so important to making progress in the skin cancer world.
Yes, so this is, as you pointed out, that's very correctly, right? It's essentially the most common cancer in the US with over 5 million cases annually. Unfortunately, right, skin cancers are very difficult to diagnose and distinguish from like non-cancerous skin lesions. And this problem is even further exaggerated when evaluation is performed by non-expert clinicians, let's say primary care level. So what happens is then this uncertainty in this initial assessment leads to failure to detect cancer at an early, very treatable stage. So that leads to a loss of around 27,000 lives in the US each year. And then it also leads to many unnecessary referrals and biopsies that cost US healthcare, more than $9 billion a year. Essentially, it takes somewhere between 20 to 50 biopsies to detect one cancer, meaning majority of them, 99%, come back as benign, meaning unnecessary. However, you don't want to risk a life, so that's why physicians essentially biopsy everything that looks suspicious to their eye, right? And third, it also leads to hundreds of malpractice claims due to false negative diagnosis. So essentially, the problem with skin cancer is, right, that it's more like an iceberg. What you see on the top when you look and when you do visual inspection does not reflect what's underneath, right? So you need technologies that can look at under the skin and detect a biomarker that allows you to identify, let's say, clinically significant skin cancers. So this is what Veriskin is focusing at.
Amazing. And talk about the evolution of the company. How's it going? And what are you most focused on and excited about currently, Mirianas?
Yeah, so I mean, we essentially, when we started, we have this idea that that was essentially triggered by my scientific background in more in a chemical dynamics, where we look at the dynamics to identify in the dynamics of some system, some abstract system, whatever that might be chemical system, where we look at the dynamics and try to see a response of that system in time, right? So evolution in time. And so this is like in contrast, like say when you take an image of something, right? And then you look at the image and you try to identify what you see in it, right? When you use dynamics, you look at the evolution in time of a system and you deduce what that system is from the dynamics. So this was my background. Like I have a Ph.D. in chemical dynamics. And so I saw that maybe perhaps we could look at the response of skin blood flow to like external perturbation. So imagine like if you apply a small force to your nail, right? And you'll notice you basically bleach your blood from it, right? And so when you release that force, blood basically recovers. You see the skin becoming red again. And so there is a time scale associated with that, right? And that time scale is extremely sensitive to a vasculature, microvasculature in the tissue. And so this is what we do. Essentially, when you compare a normal tissue response to a malignant, there is a huge differences because there is a process called pathological angiogenesis, which happens when the scan grows. It essentially, cancer develops its own abnormal vasculature that looks very different than the normal tissue vasculature. And it functions differently. There's a much higher density of blood vessels. There's typically much more blood in it. And so its response and the dynamics of blood flow is very different. And this is our biomarker. So that was the original idea in around 2013. So what we did at the time, a couple of my colleagues, we essentially built a small prototype, or not a small, it was huge on a cart. And then we essentially ran our own clinical study here in San Diego and in Yuma, Arizona, where we got a few data points from a small number of patients, which showed really good promise, high promise. So NIH, or more precisely, National Cancer Institute of NIH awarded us first grant. So this essentially allowed us to start the company in 2016. And since then, we essentially got 3 NIH awards that helped us to develop this technology, test it in a large-scale clinical trials, clinical studies, I must say, over 1,000 people, or like 1,500 lesions. And so that still showed a lot of promise. We got our first private investment in 2002 from a number of known angel groups in the US. And so we essentially, the company took off. And right now, we just started our FDA pivotal clinical trial, which is like in the midst somewhere of it. We'll continue until the end of this year, probably into next year a little bit. I must also say that we got a lot of support from the FDA, especially when we received breakthrough device designation status a few years ago, which helps us with the regulatory process. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And where is it at in terms of commercialization? Where are you guys at in terms of that?
Yeah, so we are operating in a very regulated industry, right? Skin cancer. And so we need to receive FDA clearance to market, right? So that requires perform a number of clinical studies, including the main standalone performance study, which we, as I mentioned, are in the midst of it. Once that is completed, we'll file for clearance and we'll be able to market the product. Essentially, we plan to market to primary care market, to primary care physicians, physician assistants, nurses, and the like, to help them to basically screen the patients that come in and they have like suspect lesion. And so it should be mentioned that, as I mentioned ago, it takes a large number of referrals and biopsy until one catches a skin cancer. And unfortunately, very often the skin lesion looks like completely normal. Like typically, when physicians evaluate skin lesions, they use visual criteria called ABCD. And sometimes, the lesions just look completely normal, right? And it's that what that leads to, that, if it's a cancer, right? It goes unchecked, it grows, and in some cases it's too late once it's actually detected. So that's kind of the business model. We will essentially give device for free and then charge per use fee for each tested lesion. And overall, we anticipate it's both going to save lives and reduce costs to the healthcare.
Fantastic. And talk a little bit about, you've read this, what was it like coming from Lithuania to Caltech? Was that scary, exciting? How did you view that at the time?
It was, amazing experience. I came to this country, basically I came directly after graduating, after receiving my Ph.D. in Sweden. I came directly to Caltech in 1997 and joined a group of Professor Zwill. Caltech is an amazing place. There's not much to be said there. I really enjoyed my years over there. Towards the end of my stay there, my advisor, Professor Zwill, received a Nobel Prize. That was in 1999. So it was a very exciting time for all of us in the group over there. And it certainly, I certainly enjoyed it quite a bit. I have still very good memories. I learned a lot, and the people that I worked with were amazing. I mean, they're all best and brightest from all over the world, actually. So it's a great school for sure.
That's fantastic, amazing. And talk about just a couple of the lessons you've learned down this entrepreneurial path from scientist to science entrepreneur.
So basically, being entrepreneur, especially at an early stage, it's somewhat of a lonely business because, you're basically on your own. I mean, sometimes you have a few partners, but a lot of time you basically work on your own. And so it's, it's very different from when you work for a larger company, obviously, right? And so you have to be persistent, and you have to really believe in what you're doing, to persevere, right? And the setbacks happen all the time, but you really have to be focused and just be persistent, right? And just keep going, and certainly, listening and seeking advice, very important. But you don't always have to follow that. Don't have to follow like a regular path, but you always have to bounce your ideas from someone, and as much as possible, to make sure you don't get sidetracked. That's basically that's my experience. Yeah.
Literally remarkable. I want to, Mirianas, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, CEO and founder of Veriskin. It's remarkable the journey you're on and what you've accomplished. I am so inspired by you. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Becker Business and the Becker Private Equity Podcast.
Thank you, Scott.